Good day, I'm Lizzie and we are from Tutorial 3 Group 2. Our group will be representing the legal advisor of Switzerland. And this is the member of our group.
Hi, I'm legal advisor of Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Switzerland.
Well, I'm the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he said just now. Does this RTA weaken our sovereignty?
It can limit it. Once we sign, we must follow the rules and cannot act freely in some trust matters.
Can unfair terms be changed?
Yes, the agreement can be renegotiated. It's not a point of no return, so the state sovereignty will not be eroded.
Oh, so sovereignty is constrained, not taken away.
Exactly. Renegotiation is how the state protects its sovereignty.
And this is the question that consists in the presentation guideline.
Greetings, sir. My name is Xing Yu. As Switzerland legal advisor, I will explain that sovereignty and non-intervention ensure all states are equal, while modern treaties can limit sovereignty and involve some external influence. Article 2, subsection 1 of the UN Charter states that the organization is based on the principle of the sovereignty equality of all its members regardless of size or power. Although RTA cannot be easily undone, Article 2, subsection 1 shows that Switzerland remain fully sovereignty by retaining full control over its domestic and foreign policies and avoid external interference. The minister plans to review and renegotiate unfair terms is an example of exercising sovereignty. To preserve sovereignty, Switzerland should carefully negotiate or request changes to protect its core decision-making powers. Moreover, Article 2, subsection 3 mentioned that all members must resolve dispute peacefully. Switzerland can keep its sovereignty by using the RTA dispute settlement mechanism to resolve issues legally without outside interference. Article 2, subsection 4 also prohibits states to use or threaten force against another state territory. Switzerland cannot be forced through threats, sanctions, or economic pressures to accept unfair RTA terms. Treaty must not become a way to force compliance. Here are examples of RTA provisions that limit sovereignty. Articles 5.1 and 5.2 of the ART requires Malaysia to follow US trade measures, including adopting similar import restrictions for economic or security reasons and comply with US rules on security-sensitive goods. If Switzerland faces the same constraint, it cannot be forced to follow US law. Both countries should consult before taking action, but all decisions will remain under Swiss law, ensuring they align with Switzerland's national interests and security. Moreover, Trump's claims that the US should control Greenland shows that even powerful countries cannot override the smaller states' sovereignty. Similarly, Switzerland's sovereignty is protected under international law and cannot be forced to accept trade terms. Just as the world rejected coercion against Greenland, Switzerland cannot be lawfully pressured through sanctions or economic threats. All decisions must respect Swiss independence. Lastly, the UN Secretary-General highlighted that respecting sovereignty and territorial integrity is a core UN principle. This means Switzerland's sovereignty is preserved and it cannot be forced to comply. Switzerland retains full control over economic policies, trade negotiation, and dispute resolution under the RTA.
I'm Lizzie. Now I will be presenting for the question 2, which is about how treaty law is applied and should be used as the mechanism for future control to protect the state sovereignty. First, we need to identify the definition of treaty as according to Article 2A of the VCLT. Treaty is an international agreement between states in written form and governed by the international law. Thus, applied to the RTA, it is clearly identified as the written international agreement governed by the international law. As RTA involved with the state only, it aligns with the VCLT definition of the treaty as according to Article 2A, meaning all treaty law rules apply to protect the state sovereignty. Also, I divided this question into two parts. First part is about how treaty law is applied. So here, Article 11 VCLT provides the ways in which a state can express its concern. Firstly, by signature. Switzerland should recognize that signature alone does not always create a binding obligation and allow to renegotiate the unfair terms. Second, states should exchange their instrument. As provided by the Article 13 of the VCLT, only after the state exchange their instrument can they be bound by the treaty, which means that the legal obligation only arises when it is expressly intended to avoid the unintended constraint on the regulatory autonomy. Third one is the ratification of the treaty. Ratification also allows Switzerland to reassess how the RTA affects the national economic interest, as the treaty required the parliamentary approval to be valid, and Switzerland should use the ratification process as the safeguard to reassess the RTA impact on the national interest before being bound. And fourth is the accession. As according to the Article 15 of the VCLT, the treaty participation is voluntary, which is looking at the state concern. Thus, Switzerland's sovereignty is exercised, not surrendered. And the second part of the question is treaty law is a future control mechanism to protect a state sovereignty. Switzerland should rely on the validity rules under the VCLT to protect its sovereignty. A treaty law may be challenged if the Switzerland concern was failed due to error, fraud, corruption, coercion, and also the violation of the just caution. Applied to the RTA, it means that Switzerland should emphasize that US cannot compel the compliance if any of these defects affected the Switzerland concern. If the RTA was concluded under the conduct given just now, Switzerland may legally challenge the validation of the RTA to ensure that sovereignty is preserved as the concern not freely given. And thus, for the conclusion of question 2, the treaty law provides a clear legal framework to protect the sovereignty. Switzerland retains the ability to challenge the RTA.
Hi, my name is Ivory Chu. Question 3 regards how does international law allow Switzerland to address state responsibility and resolve a dispute peacefully when it perceives excessive external control by US while balancing the sovereignty with compliance to treaty obligation? As Switzerland's legal advisor, we not concerns over the unfair RTA terms and their impact on sovereignty and Switzerland's international legal responsibility. State responsibility arises when a state commits an internationally wrongful act. It occurs when a state breaches a treaty or customary international law. Once the RTA was signed by Switzerland, it becomes a binding treaty obligation. Any unilateral action by the Switzerland, such as imposing discriminatory tariffs, would breach the treaty and trigger the Switzerland's international responsibility. The Articles on State Responsibility 2001 codify the law on state responsibility. Even if the RTA is seen as unfair or imbalanced, Switzerland cannot lawfully justify the non-compliance by relying on the domestic law, policy changes, or economic concerns. Under Article 4, the conduct of any state organ includes legislative, executive, or judicial is attributable to the state. Thus, under the RTA, any actions taken by the Swiss organ, such as impose trade measures inconsistent with the RTA, are legally attributable to the Switzerland under the international law. Any measures breaching the RTA would engage a state responsibility, so all organs must comply. To avoid state responsibility, Switzerland must refrain from unilateral breaches of the RTA. Instead of breaching the RTA, renegotiation, mediation, and other peaceful dispute settlement mechanisms can be used by the Switzerland to address any perceived unfairness while remaining the complaint. Diplomatic means are the primary method of a peaceful dispute settlement. Negotiation enables a state to resolve a dispute directly through diplomatic channels and, as affirmed in the case of North Sea Continental Shelf, must be genuine and aim at agreement. Accordingly, Switzerland should first negotiate with the US over the potentially unfair RTM measures and, if necessary, escalate the discussion to summit meetings while remaining compliant with the international law. When negotiation fails, states can turn to mediation. In mediation, Switzerland can seek third-party mediation, where a neutral mediator facilitates the dialogue, interpret the position, and propose solutions. This allows Switzerland to resolve a RTA dispute peacefully without breaching international law. Additionally, Switzerland can use good officers, a neutral third party like the United Nations Secretary General, to restore the communication with the US, pass messages, and encourage negotiation without imposing solution. In conclusion, Switzerland must avoid unilateral breaches of the RTA and resolve a dispute through negotiation, mediation, or good officers to remain compliant with the international law while protecting its sovereignty.
Good day, sir. My name is Lee Ting Eun Amanda. Today, I would like to discuss on 4.0, which is how domestic constitutional frameworks for treaty making and implementation interact with the international obligations, focusing on the balance between executive and legislative roles, judicial interpretation, and the mechanisms such as reservations or termination clauses to safeguard sovereignty. So, the balance between executive and legislative roles. In executive Switzerland, the Federal Council is constitutionally empowered to negotiate and sign international treaties to ensure efficiency. Once ratified, a treaty legally binds Switzerland, potentially limiting future domestic policy. Trade agreements can restrict a state from raising tariffs or enacting protectionist measures even in economic downturns, showing how treaties can limit sovereign economic decisions. Secondly, in legislative wise, Switzerland's constitution requires parliamentary approval of international treaties. In Article 166, Clause 2 of the Swiss Federal Constitution, approve international treaties except those by the Federal Council under law or treaty. If Parliament finds certain RTA provisions unfair, it can refuse ratification or limit implementation, has to protect sovereignty. In judicial interpretation, Switzerland follows the Muniz system. The Swiss Federal Supreme Court protects sovereignty by interpreting treaties in line with the Constitution and domestic law. Article 5, Clause 4 of the Swiss Constitution states that the Confederation and captains shall respect international law. If an RTA provision conflicts with constitutional protections, Swiss courts may interpret the provisions narrowly to limit has domestic impact. Firstly, reservations. In Article 19 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, states may enter reservations when ratifying treaties. This allows Switzerland to exclude or modify specific obligations. As an application, Switzerland can reserve the right to shield sensitive sectors like agriculture or public health care from full market liberalization under the RTA. Secondly, termination. Article 54 of the Vienna Convention allows a withdrawal in accordance with the treaty provisions. This supports the minister's statement that the agreement is not a point of no return. If RTA obligations threaten Switzerland's economic stability, it may legally withdraw from or renegotiate the treaty. Therefore, international treaty law itself recognizes that states can limit or exit treaty obligations, a legal mechanism to protect the sovereignty. In Swiss referendum tradition, it allows a certain treaties to be submitted to a public vote. Therefore, direct democracy in Switzerland provides an extra layer of democratic control over treaty commitment. With the rejection of the 2018 self-determination initiative strikes a balance with the constitutional checks by the parliament, judiciary, and the electorate.
A very good day. I'm Dennis Gong, as Switzerland Legal Advisor to Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We propose several actionable policy options to manage the risks posed by the RTA with the United States of America. To protect the Swiss sovereignty, the RTA should include a self-judging safeguard, allowing the Switzerland to suspend or refuse the compliance when its essential interests are at risk. An example of the clause would be that nothing in the agreement prevents a party from taking a measure it considers necessary to protect its essential security interests. It leaves the assessment of necessity to Switzerland rather than external tribunals as modeled on the JIE Article 21. It ensures that the national security and fundamental state interest remains within the sovereign domains and prevents the RTA from becoming a point of no return in exceptional circumstances. Moving on, the second policy is Switzerland should attach interpretative statements under Article 31 of the Vienna Conventions to clarify our understandings of RTA obligations. This is essential because ambiguous terms may otherwise be interpreted expansively, leading to an indirect erosion of regulatory autonomy and unintended policy alignments. For example, if the Swiss RTA contains a clause like Article 2.3 of the US-Malaysia RTA on agriculture, which require the market access for agricultural goods and SPS measures to be science and risk-based, yet does not clearly define agricultural goods or unjustified SPS barriers, we must avoid this risk by issuing the interpretative statements that clarify these terms and affirm our right to apply the precautionary SPS measures under the domestic law while remaining compliant with the RTA. Moving on, to prevent any trade agreements from becoming a permanent or unchallengeable obligations, our top policy is to impose the review sunset clause and termination mechanisms. So firstly, we should include a fixed periodic review and renewal clause for joint review, for example 3 to 5 years, supported by a sunset clause requiring affirmative renewal. The approach is modeled on the US-Mexico-Canada agreements, which require a joint review 6 years after entry into force and whether to extend the agreement. So the regular review will ensure that the unfair terms can be renegotiated over time rather than allowing the disputes to accumulate. Second, Switzerland should incorporate a clear termination mechanism similar to Article 7.5 of the US-Malaysia RTA, allowing either party to withdraw with 180 days with the notice. So this will preserve the Switzerland's sovereign rights to assist the unfair agreements to ensure the RTA never become a point of no return. So our fourth policy is diversification while avoiding conflicts. We must conduct a rigorous cross-check to prevent the RTA from clashing with our fundamental EU agreements, which is the Swiss EU bilateral agreements on agriculture and the EU-Swiss MRAS on the technical barriers to trade. So if Swiss RTA contain a clause like Article 2.3 para B in the US-Malaysia RTAs, which restricts the partners from aligning the third country standards, will create an unacceptable conflict for us as we will require to dynamically align with the evolving EU standards. So therefore, we will be forced to choose between the breaching US agreements or losing the friction-free access to the EU if the US deemed an EU standards is non-scientific. Worse still, non-compliance could trigger cross-default, allowing suspension of benefit accruals unrelated RTA chapters. So in conclusion, we must cross-check proposed RTA tests with existing trade agreements to avoid the treaty conflicts or cross-default risks and proactively manage the reputation. When you're down and feeling low, everything
things moving slow. Just wanna run away, pick up and go. Leave them behind, hit the door. Block the noise inside my head. Find my voice to compensate. Work on me and accept my fate. Make amends to regenerate. Let's be honest, we all make mistakes. Need some time to recuperate. Haters will exaggerate. Remorse is what makes you great. Take some time to find your purpose. Recognize what should come first. We all live for a reason, found in the universe within.